bear's nightmare. A wound that crawls. Picture the frozen wastelands of the Arctic, where the ice stretches for miles, silent and unforgiving. The cold wind howls across the barren land, a place where only the strongest survive. In the distance, something moves, a massive figure, trudging slowly through the snow, its thick white fur barely concealing the injuries beneath. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary polar bear, a king of this icy domain. But as it moves closer, the details become clearer, and something is terribly wrong. Its once powerful body is battered, its fur stained with streaks of red and yellow, an infection spreading beneath the surface. And then, the real horror becomes visible, a wound unlike anything you have ever seen. It is not a clean gash from a fight. It is not a deep puncture from a desperate struggle. This wound is something entirely different. It looks as if the flesh has been scooped away in tiny, perfect circles, leaving a honeycomb-like pattern where solid muscle should be. But what makes it truly disturbing is that the wound is not still. It is moving. Inside the open crater of flesh, strange pale stalks are growing. They sway gently in the freezing wind, twitching and shifting as if they have a mind of their own. They look almost like plant roots sprouting from the bear's exposed tissue, but these things are very much alive. They are feeding, they are growing, and they are making a home in the open, rotting flesh of one of the Arctic's most fearsome predators. These are goose barnacles, and they have turned the wound of this great beast into a living ecosystem. How did this happen? Why does the injury look like a decaying coral reef rather than an ordinary wound? And, most disturbingly, what will happen to the bear as these creatures continue to spread? This is a story of nature's darkest tricks, a story of survival and decay, a story that will make you question whether even the most powerful animals are truly safe in their own world. A wound that became a home. For a predator like the polar bear, injuries are part of life. Hunting seals in the icy waters is no easy task. A single mistake, a slip on the ice, a misjudged lunge, can leave deep wounds that take weeks to heal. Sometimes, these wounds come from the sharp claws of another bear during a territorial fight, or from an attack by a desperate wolf pack bold enough to challenge the Arctic's top predator. But this wound is different. Something has prevented it from healing. Instead of closing over time, the injury has remained open, a festering crater that has become a breeding ground for creatures that should never be inside a living body. At some point, the bear must have ventured into the sea, its wounds still raw and exposed. The ocean, a vast and indifferent force, carried invisible passengers, microscopic larvae drifting through the water, searching for a surface to cling to. These larvae belong to a creature most people associate with shipwrecks, rocks, and driftwood. But unlike ordinary barnacles, these ones are not picky about where they settle. For them, a floating piece of dead whale flesh, the underside of a boat, or the open wound of a struggling animal are all equally suitable places to call home. The larvae found the perfect environment in the bear's open injury. They latched on and began their transformation, digging their way into the exposed muscle, fusing themselves to the bear's living body. And from that moment, the wound was no longer just an injury. It was now an ecosystem. Goose barnacles, the flesh builders. To understand the horror of this infestation, we need to take a closer look at these strange, almost alien-like creatures. Unlike the rough, rock-hard barnacles that cling to piers and ship hulls, goose barnacles are different. They do not simply attach and stay still. They grow, they stretch, they move. Each barnacle has a long, flexible stalk, soft and rubbery, almost like the stem of a mushroom. This stalk allows them to sway with the water currents, feeding on passing nutrients. They are not parasites in the traditional sense. They do not drain blood, they do not inject venom, and they do not burrow under the skin. Instead, they simply attach and refuse to let go, forming clusters of living, breathing organisms that turn their host into something unnatural. These barnacles are opportunists. They are often found on whales, where they cluster in great numbers along the skin, forming rough patches that almost look like coral reefs. But in rare cases, they attach to something much worse, rotting flesh. A whale carcass floating in the ocean is the perfect place for them. As the dead body drifts through the water, the barnacles grow in thick, writhing colonies, turning the corpse into a moving island of decay. But the polar bear is not dead. It is still alive, still walking, still trying to survive, even as these creatures dig their way into its body. What happens to the bear? They do not inject poison, they do not feed on its blood, and they do not attack its internal organs. But the infection is a different story. The presence of barnacles keeps the wound from closing. The open flesh is exposed to bacteria, to freezing winds, to the constant irritation of moving stalks grinding against raw muscle. The bear is now carrying a colony of foreign organisms, and its body is fighting a battle it cannot win. With every movement, the barnacles shift and sway, causing pain with every step. The bear grows weaker, its energy drained not just by the wound, but by the slow rot creeping through its body. Eventually, one of three things will happen. The bear will die from infection. The bacteria entering the wound will spread through the bloodstream, poisoning the body until it can no longer function. The bear will become too weak to hunt, without the strength to chase down seals. Starvation will set in, and the Arctic does not forgive weakness. A stronger predator will finish the job. Another bear, sensing the weakness, may attack. A pack of wolves may take the opportunity, or perhaps the ocean itself will reclaim the bear, pulling it into the freezing depths, where it will become just another drifting carcass. A final resting place for the creatures that started its downfall. The silent invasion, mussel infestations, a seamless shift from one horror to the next. The Arctic wind howls, the ice groans under its own weight, and somewhere in the distance, a predator struggles under the weight of an infestation it never invited. The polar bear, its wound teeming with barnacles, has become something unnatural, a moving, breathing ecosystem trapped in a slow decay. But if you think barnacles are the only creatures that exploit the bodies of the strong, think again. The ocean is filled with invaders, creatures that do not need claws or teeth to overpower their victims. Some are small, some are delicate, and some, like the barnacles, do not seem dangerous at first, until you realize they have completely taken over. Because while barnacles claim flesh, mussels claim entire landscapes. This is not a story of infection in an individual. This is a story of infestation on a scale so massive, it drowns entire ecosystems. The mussel's master plan. Mussels are not fast. They do not bite, sting, or hunt. They do not have eyes. They do not have brains. And they do not have any weapon other than sheer, unstoppable numbers. But what they lack in violence, they make up for in persistence. A single mussel drifting through the water seems harmless enough. It is just a small shell, floating along with the current, looking for a place to settle. But mussels are never alone. Where there is one, there are thousands. Where there are thousands, there are millions. And once they find a place to anchor themselves, they never let go. Unlike barnacles, which latch onto surfaces and grow in strange alien clusters, mussels build armies. They attach in vast colonies, creating walls of living creatures, layer upon layer, sealing themselves together with an unbreakable glue made of fibers stronger than steel. This glue, called byssal threads, allows them to grip onto anything: rocks, docks, boats, even the shells of other living creatures. And once they begin their invasion, stopping them is almost impossible. The mussel's invasion begins. A mussel infestation does not happen overnight. It begins with just a few larvae drifting in the current, microscopic specks too small for the eye to see. But as they find their way into new waters, attaching themselves to any hard surface they can find, the transformation begins. The first signs are subtle. A boat, returning from a distant shore, brings with it a hitchhiker, a single mussel clinging to the hull, waiting for the perfect moment to release its eggs into a new environment. A lake, once clear and thriving, suddenly has a few strange shells scattered along its bottom. Fishermen barely notice. Swimmers do not pay attention. After all, what harm could a few mussels possibly do? But within weeks, the numbers double. Within months, they multiply beyond control. And within years, the lake has changed forever. How mussels take over the world. Unlike barnacles, which rely on waves and water movement to bring them food, mussels are filter feeders. This means they consume everything in their path, sucking in water and stripping it of plankton, nutrients, and even microscopic life. At first, this might seem like a good thing: clear water, less algae, a seemingly cleaner environment. But this is an illusion. In reality, the ecosystem is dying beneath the surface. Mussels outcompete native species, devouring the very life that supports the food chain. Fish, once thriving on plankton, and small creatures find themselves in an empty, silent wasteland. The creatures that once relied on natural currents and seasonal changes struggle to survive, as mussels create an artificial dead zone where nothing but their own kind can flourish. The impact is devastating. In some regions, mussel infestations have been so severe that entire water systems collapse. Once lively rivers become choked with millions of shells, their flow restricted, their natural balance thrown into chaos. Power plants, which rely on water intake for cooling, find their pipes completely clogged with living mussel colonies, costing millions in damages and repairs. Dams, bridges, and water infrastructure built to last centuries are weakened and destroyed as layers of mussels attach themselves with a grip so strong that removing them becomes an endless, losing battle. The living prison. When mussels trap other creatures, mussels do not stop at inanimate objects. They attach to living beings, just as barnacles do. Turtles, their shells once smooth and strong, find themselves weighed down by an ever-growing burden of mussels covering their backs. Their movement slows, their ability to swim freely diminishes, and for some, it becomes a death sentence. A slow, suffocating weight that drowns them in their own armor. Crabs, lobsters, even other shellfish are not immune. Mussels lock them in place, sealing their joints, covering their shells, trapping them inside a living prison. Unable to move, unable to feed, they become nothing more than buried artifacts in a growing wall of mussel shells. And the most terrifying part? They are still alive, entombed inside the infestation, helpless as the mussels continue to spread. What happens when mussels win? There is no single predator that can stop them. Unlike barnacles, which are often scraped away by waves or eaten by fish, mussels have few natural enemies. Some species of fish and birds feed on them, but not in large enough numbers to control the population. They grow too fast, they spread too easily, and they never stop reproducing. In some lakes and rivers, the only solution is to drain the water completely, exposing the mussels to air and baking them under the sun until they die. But even this is not always effective. Mussels can survive out of water for weeks. Some have been known to close their shells tightly and wait, surviving long enough to be transported elsewhere, where they begin their invasion anew. The battle against mussel infestations is a battle against time itself. A final thought. Nature has always found ways to remind us that survival does not belong to the strong or the fast or even the intelligent. Sometimes survival belongs to the quiet, unassuming creatures that simply refuse to